Hello, I'm Stephen Pratt, and for today's Arts Alive music, we're here in the iconic Philharmonic Hall in Liverpool. It's a hall that's undergone extensive renovation recently, and as I speak, that renovation continues. But it's not about renovation we're here to talk about today. One of the world's outstanding conductors, Sir Andrew Davis, was in Liverpool recently to conduct Mahler's Second Symphony, and he did so with our orchestra here and the choir. During the course of this visit, it was announced that Sir Andrew was going to become Conductor Emeritus with the orchestra. And so I took the opportunity to meet with him and talk about that. Andrew, welcome. And I'm tempted to say welcome back, because Liverpool was very much a part of your early career, wasn't it?
Humongously important, yes. I first was here in 1969 for a 2-week seminar for young British conductors, which was, I remember staying in dormitories of the Liverpool University, I think, with the rehearsal orchestra, who were also up here. And we stayed up all night one night watching the moon landing in 1969. So sort of the two events are inextricably linked in my mind. And then I came back actually. The next season I came back, and it was sort of tinged with tragedy, really, because I don't know whether you remember, but you remember the young conductor Gordon Mackey?
Very well, yes. He was in the first seminar, wasn't he? Was he?
Yes, I believe so. Yes, and he was due to conduct half a concert in which Walton was conducting Belshazzar's Feast in the second half, and he was killed most tragically. He was standing in a taxi queue outside Victoria Station, I think, and that's before they had barriers up, and some car went ploughing into a bunch of people, and he died. It was very sad. So, and I remember it was the Bizet Symphony in C, which actually I'm very fond of, but I don't think I've done it since, as a matter of fact. And then I think there was a period when I was principal guest conductor in the mid-70s. I don't remember exactly year, for 3 years or something. And then I went to Toronto and had a little less time, but I used to come back fairly regularly. And then there was a long time, of course, when I was exclusive with the BBC Symphony Orchestra, all through the 90s when I wasn't here at all. And then I think I was here, the last time, they told me it's 7 years ago. It's amazing how time flies. And I mean, we did a Viennese program at the time when there was a Klimt exhibition on in town, and the Queen came. But I've always had a tremendous affection for this orchestra and this hall. I love the Phil. I love the way it looks. You know, it's a very late deco building, isn't it? Actually, what, 39 it was built, I think? I think, was it? Oh, okay. Well, whatever. Anyway, I love it, and I love the sound, and I'm interested because I think there's a little difference in the sound since they've done the work on it. I think a little bit of the intimacy is lost, and there's a little bit of tendency, I think, for the sound to be very bright. You know, we have to be careful with that. But the orchestra plays fantastically, I have to say. It's really a treat.
So in those early days, you must have learnt an awful lot from that great mentor of yours at the time, Sir Charles Groves.
He was wonderful. Actually, I knew him before I came here because Jonathan, his son, was a chorister at King's College, Cambridge, when I was the organ scholar. So Charles and Hilary used to come down every now and then and visit. But he was extremely kind to me, I must say, and very encouraging. And he was just a great gentleman and a wonderful artist, wonderful musician, actually. I had the greatest admiration for him. I remember being at his house once, and he just received the LPs of his recording of the Delius Mass of Life, and we were sitting in his study with this Delius blasting away at us, and we were both having a great time listening to it. And I finally did the piece 2 years ago, actually. It's a monster.
And in those days, I guess you were learning new pieces for the first time for you. You mentioned the Bizet Symphony in C. Must have been many others that you were doing for the first time.
Yes, I think so. From 70 to 72, I was assistant conductor with the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra in Glasgow, and I got a hell of a lot of repertoire under my belt. It must have been dreadful, actually. But certainly when I came here, I was still doing a lot of things. So I think I did my first Shostakovich 10 here. I mean, there's certain things stick in your mind. And Mahler too, I think I did my second performance of it here. My first had been in Toronto at the end of my first season, so it must have been sort of in May of 76 or something like that. And I was back in my dressing room, sort of collapsing. And there was a knock on the door, And I opened the door, and there was Frankie Howard, who it turns out was a marla nut, a complete marla nut. And so I opened the door, and he said, "Oh, it was wonderful." And it was the most surreal experience. And of course, I wanted to say, "Oh no, did you think so, really?" But and I saw him once after that in London. But yes, I mean, there were many things that were coming up for the first time, and it's inevitable, I suppose. And sometimes you do it better the first time than you do it subsequently. It's one of the things about being young is that you don't know things are hard necessarily. You know what I mean? And you sort of come to realize it later in life. You think, "Good Lord!" You said that I did my first Rite of Spring here, and and you said I was a basket case afterwards.
Tired and exhilarated.
Tired and exhilarated, yes. Well, it is actually a very scary piece, as you know, and it's an astonishing piece. One of my beasts is that we don't play enough Stravinsky these days. I mean, the three big ballets, Rite of Spring, Petrushka, and Firebird, but so much of the other. So I'm trying to, whenever I can, I try to rectify that.
So we're seeing a lot more of you in Liverpool with your new role then?
Well, yes, the plan is I'll be here once a year, which is great. So it's sort of adding another little another orchestra to the two orchestras of which I've been principal conductor or music director before, Toronto and the BBC Symphony Orchestra, and I go back to them every year. I think Toronto, it's like, this is my 42nd consecutive season standing on the podium in front of that orchestra, which is that's amazing. But it's something I find very satisfying about that, to keep the link with them and with the BBC. And now I have a new exciting adventure in Melbourne. So I've been there it's my third season now, and that's very exciting. Because when I left the BBC in 2000 and went to Chicago to the opera, I mean, I love that, and of course I did a lot of stuff there for the first time, because really I'd never done any of the Wagner operas when I went, and I was, so that was 2000, so I was, how old was I? I was 56 or something, 55, and now I've done all the Wagner operas, and I've done all the Puccini operas, and so that's been an exciting adventure too.
We'll take a break now. Join us in a couple of minutes. So your career these days takes you all over the world, and you've mentioned your connections and your long-standing connections with orchestras. The business of being a chief conductor and the other stuff that comes with it, how do you balance that? I mean, I'm thinking particularly for the layman who might be watching today. They probably don't realise that a chief conductor also has to get involved in some of the organisation, the running of the orchestra. Is that something that you relish?
I wouldn't say relish, but I'm used to it. I mean, the administrative things you have to do, question about orchestra personnel, planning, of course, and that's fun. I always enjoy planning seasons, but also fundraising, I have to say, is increasingly important. I mean, I'm certainly used to that to a certain extent from Toronto, although in those days the orchestra used to get quite a lot of government money, as Melbourne still does, but it's, as a percentage of budget, it decreases all the time. So, talking to donors and patrons is a part of that, and of course in Chicago more than anywhere, because as you know, in America there are very little in the way of public funds available for any arts organization. So yeah, that's it can be exhausting, but I do think it's an important part of the job, and so I do it with good grace and even enthusiasm at times. But it is a lot of, I mean, and constantly I'm getting bombarded with emails asking me questions about things, from all over.
Now you've conducted all over the world. You've conducted lots of orchestras. There's a lot of talk, particularly in record magazines, this kind of thing, about the sounds of different orchestras and so on. Now again, to the layman, there's the same number of instruments on the stage. Yeah. Is this a myth, or is it a reality that orchestras have their own, very own personal sound?
Well, yes, I think so. I mean, There were, in the old days, if you went to France and you heard a French orchestra, it couldn't be anything else. Now,
Bassoons and horns.
yes, there's the horns sounding like saxophones and all that stuff. But actually, I don't think that's the case anymore. I mean, if you go to, I've worked with 3 of the orchestras in Paris at this point over the years, and really, I mean, if you give them French music to play, then of course they probably play it with more understanding and kind of instinct for the style and the colour than any orchestra anywhere else. But in terms of the sounds of the instruments, there's much less difference than there used to be. I think in France a lot of the bassoon players play German bassoons now. I mean, not all of them, right? But it's a very different sound, of course, and of course the French orchestras were the last to play trombones with a narrow bore, but that was sometime in the 50s, I think. They finally gave in. But yes, but that aside, I think orchestras do have their own musical personalities. Of course, it depends on the personnel. I mean, the kind of wind players you have, woodwind players especially, and principal brass, certainly to a certain extent colours everything else. But in a way, the most important element in an orchestra sound is the string sound, I think. And that's what I'm always interested in developing. And I love the way they play here. And there's some passages in the Mahler, particularly the really soft things that they play with great beauty. And this hall still actually gives you something quite special in those moments. So I mean, it's. I mean, there are very few people remaining in the orchestra from when I, first was here all those years ago.
Still 1 or 2, aren't
there? There are 1 or 2, yes, absolutely, and we've had a couple of chats about the old days. But yes, it's an orchestra with great personality and great sense of commitment, I think. I mean, I remember that from years ago, but particularly now, I think there's a great relish for the work, for the music making, and I love that.
You yourself, you were a keyboard player when you were at Cambridge, and did you have any orchestral experience before you started conducting as a player?
No, not really. I mean, I played orchestral piano in a few things, but they're very few and far between.
So when you talk about developing the string sounds, and this is something that as a conductor you develop, you learn how everything works.
Oh yes.
And
I did study the violin from about the age of 11 to 13, but I gave it up because I was already rather good on the piano, and I couldn't stand the sound I made. And I think if you're going to be a string player, you have to go through that initial phase where everything sounds just ghastly, until you break through that and get into somewhere where you actually start to make a good sound and play in tune and all that sort of thing. And I didn't have, well, as I say, I just wanted to be playing the piano. So, and I did study the oboe during my teens as well. Right. I wasn't a very good oboe player. I was a better cor anglais player, as a matter of fact. I played that fairly decently. But yes, I mean, clearly you have to understand how everything works and have empathy for people as they play. So yes, I mean, I think I have a pretty good understanding of what makes everything tick, and and of course I do ask for things from the string players. Mahler's very fond of saying these things at langgezogen, where you actually use a lot of bow but with very little pressure, Spannung, as the Germans say, very little contact with the string, so that it's a sort of gliding sound. And they do that beautifully, but I had to bully them slightly.
So this is your first concert with your new title of Conductor Emeritus, and you're succeeding 2 great conductors who were very attached to Liverpool, Sir Charles Mackerras and Vernon Handley, Todd Handley. How do you feel about that?
Well, when they approached me and said, would you be interested in accepting this title? Well, as they say, you could have knocked me down with a feather. But I was really, more than delighted. I feel very honoured, actually. And I've got 2 conductor laureate titles with my own old orchestras in Toronto and the BBC. But this is, I don't know, it's special. And because this was where I really, my career as a conductor began, I was very moved by it, and I'm actually thrilled and delighted. I mean, the plan is I'll come back here once a year now, and because it's been a while since I've had any continuity with this orchestra, a long time actually, I couldn't be happier really. It somehow puts an arc over one's on one's musical life, and I'm very moved by that.
Well, we're delighted. Today you're here later on today, you're here for Mahler 2,
Yeah.
a massive piece.
Yes.
Huge number, 10 horns.
Yes, at the end.
At the end, yeah. It's going to be a huge spectacular for everybody, and presumably a really big effort for the choir, the orchestra, and everybody. I mean, it's not an easy play and sing, is it?
No. I mean, the choir does, of course, only sings in the last movement, and only the last half of the last movement of that. But it certainly is a great choral sound at the end. It's absolutely thrilling. But their first entry is very hushed. I think that's the remarkable thing about this piece. It goes from the most intimate music to the most heaven-storming, I suppose you would say. Enormous first movement, long journey. It's a kind of cortege almost to me, but it's full of striving and aspiration, but ends kind of almost tragically. It certainly ends with nothing resolved. And then there are two movements. The second movement, which is a absolutely delicious Ländler, which is this Austrian country precursor of the waltz, I suppose you would say. And it is incredibly sort of Viennese in feeling, but also, it's like peasant music kind of raised into a sophisticated world somehow. I find it absolutely gorgeous.
Berg, they all had a touch on the Ländler, didn't they?
Oh yes,
marvelous.
Yeah, well, Alban Berg, you find
in
the violin concerto, that wonderful little Corinthian folk tune, which is a Ländler. And then the scherzo, which is based on one of his songs, which is kind of ironic and again very excitable at times, and again this kind of striving for something outside, and then there's a huge sort of crazy hysterical kind of climax, which comes and goes very quickly, which actually recurs again at the beginning of the finale, and then before the finale is this beautiful setting, O Röschenrot, which is the alto solo sings about going towards God and meeting an angel and saying, I must go there, and which leads us naturally into the finale, when the text is all about the resurrection. Auferstehen wirst du, mein Staub nach kurzer Ruhe. You will rise again, my soul, after a brief rest. And it ends with this glorious, triumphant vision of heaven, or whatever we aspire to, whatever our feelings are on. But it's the end of a long spiritual journey that I think is. There are very few pieces really like it. I mean, I just did the Third Symphony, which is even longer. In fact, it's the longest. I won't say the longest symphony ever written, but it's the longest symphony ever written that's played all the time. And that's also a piece with enormous scope. And then, interestingly enough, in a week or so in Scotland, I'm going to be doing the Fourth, which is entirely different and much more contained and sort of a chamber orchestra piece almost.
yeah.
I mean, by comparison, and very intimate. And so the journey through the Mahler symphonies is absolutely extraordinary. They're all so different from each other. But the second has a special place in my life, and as I say, I did it here many years ago, very early on in my career, and I'll never forget that. There are a few other things. I remember doing A Dream of Gerontius with Richard Lewis, and I think it was actually the penultimate performance that he ever sang, and that was very special. And that's a piece that I love very dearly. So maybe I'll do it here sometime on one of my visits. That would be nice.
Andrew, it's been great catching up with you again, and it's so much good news that you're going to be in Liverpool more. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, it's been a delight to talk to you, of course, Stephen. We've known each other for many years too, and as I say, I'm so happy about all of this.